gonna go to school, or?
Nope.
Some of us know how to win.
Nobody's winning in that outfit.
Wake up, Natalie. Just a movie.
Don't let me get this straight. Your emergency is that your apartment is too big. You have every shoe you could ever want, and they all fit your cute feet. Yeah, exactly. That's what
Like 27?
The only reason a guy like that would ever talk to me is to get a prescription for medical marijuana.
There are only so many different stories that we're told. We're told what we remember until we try to remember things that they want us to forget.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the stage Katie Silberman. Hi. You're finally here.
I'm so happy to be here. This organization is extraordinary, and the programming that you put on and the staff, and Omaha is so lucky to have this, and I'm really, really thrilled to be here and honored to be here, so thank you.
Well, thank you. So that's a really good place for us to start then. And some folks were really kind enough to fill out these cards or to write to us early, and one of the questions that came up was if you could speak a bit about growing up in Omaha and the Midwest and how that influenced your career.
Yes, I would love to. I lived in Omaha until I was 14 and feel so grateful for that. Not only because of the amazing family that we made here, some of her you heard from before, but also because it's such a kind and nurturing place to grow up. I think I am so grateful not just for the connections that I made, but also I think for feeling very taken care of, not just by my family, but by the community at large, which I think for a young person allows them to go after what they want in a real way and feel supported in their interests and their dreams and what they're doing that way. I went to Brownell Talbot under Miss Dessler, who I'm very thrilled is here. And they had an amazing theater program and a really great arts program, and that was encouraged and supported by the parents. I mean, I say that like it was like middle school plays, but it was still like, it was very, it was taken seriously and it was encouraged, and I was really grateful for that. And I think that I've brought that mentality and kind of the optimism that your community is helpful and that the people that you're surrounded by are really friendly and kind and good to a lot of what I do. And I can feel in Los Angeles when I'm interacting with someone who's from the Midwest, we're like drawn to each other in events or parties, and we find each other. And it's not always Nebraska, but it's somewhere around here usually, and I think it's a similar mentality. So I love when I find someone in Los Angeles who's from Omaha. I just met a really talented writer named Ann Sundell, who's from Omaha. We did a job together at Netflix, and when we found out we were both from Omaha, we were so thrilled. So I love making connections like that.
Well, and I had told you when I was watching some of your interviews, you know, generally people on the red carpet, they ask you about your work and they say, oh yes, let me pontificate now about my genius. And you don't do that. You talk about the entire team of people that you've worked with. You talk about every actor. You talk about every producer. Literally anybody that you can think of, you're talking about their work and how you all came together to make this thing happen. And that's not usual.
I think, I mean, I've worked with some really extraordinary people, and so who have made everything I've written so much immeasurably better that it's hard not to. I also think Olivia really taught me that. Olivia's the kind of director and leader that is so confident in her own vision that she's incredibly open to collaboration. And working on this movie was kind of the first time I realized how tangibly the other craftspeople are storyteller contributors if you let them. And I could talk for hours about all of them. Jason McCormick, who was our DP, and Katie Byron, who was our production designer, and Brendan Selman, who was our props guy. Like, they all were so involved from the beginning in wanting to feel like they were part of the story and in adding to scenes and to storylines and to character arcs in ways that made it so that we could lift a lot of dialogue because their work was doing so much of the storytelling. And I loved learning under Olivia how to make that feel like such a whole and collaborative process because she was so encouraging of it. And it's something I think I'm going to take with me going forward in all the other movies too.
It really comes through. It's very, very clear. And I think we all feel it when we see the work. So that leads me, I just have to ask you to repeat this story you told me about when you went to Columbia, because I had asked you, you made the transition to producing so early. Is it because there were lawyers in your family, et cetera, et cetera? And you told me about how you felt when you got to Columbia, and it was because of the confidence you had from your parents, from Brownell Talbot. But can you tell that story? Do you remember what
Yes.
you told me?
Well, first of all, I do have some very talented lawyers in my family, including my mom. But when I got to Columbia at orientation, a professor said, only 10% of you are even going to be working in the film industry in 10 years. 1 out of 10 of you are going to be working in the film industry. And my first thought was like, oh my God, that sucks so much for the other 9. Like, it didn't even occur to me that should be discouraging. I was just, my only thought was like, that's a crazy number for the rest of you, which is, I think, because of the confidence that was instilled in this community and at Brownell Talbot and in my family. And I think, I don't mean to say that from any place of arrogance, but just like a real belief that this career and this dream was possible, I feel like was very helpful throughout the whole process, because it's very easy to get down on how the process can go sometimes and how difficult certain elements are. But I also, again, like, I've just been very lucky in that I've worked with really lovely people pretty consistently, and I've been able to zero in on the kinds of people that I want to work with, and that makes all the difficulties that much more easy.
So let's go back to the beginning then. A lot of the questions that came through here were very similar from younger writers. What would you advise younger writers? How did you get your start? I had a boss once who said, you know, what we do feels a little like Oz to people that don't work in our industry. And I was like, oh, I get it, sure. Like, there's a mystery behind the curtain. So could you speak a little bit about how you started and how you broke in?
Yes, I agree. And I was so ravenous for information when I was starting out too, even though I realized everyone's path was completely different. Look, what I think can be frustrating about this industry is that there isn't really a path to follow, and I'm a rather type A person, and I really like having steps that way. But I realized I wanted to be a writer in college. I did an off-term internship while I was in college at 20th Century Fox Television, and my job was to digitize their script library. They basically had a closet full of hundreds, if not thousands, of paper scripts that they used on file, where if they wanted to potentially hire a writer, they would go read their spec script to see if they were right for the project. And this was in 2007, so they wanted to digitize it. So my job was literally to just put those scripts through a PDF maker all day. So they had it on their computer, but it meant that I could read the scripts all day. And I fell in love with the concept of screenwriting and a few writers whose voices I really admired. And so then I went back to college, and like you're saying, it's Oz, so I wasn't quite sure how to do it. So I applied to film school, which I really loved my experience there. I don't think it's necessary, but I really loved my experience there. And while I was in film school, I paid for IMDb Pro, and I found the email addresses of all the writers whose scripts I'd really liked in the closet. And I just cold emailed all of them, asking if any of them needed an assistant. And no one did, but a few were really kind and wrote back. And 2 of them who wrote back were these really talented writers named Dana Fox and Lorene Scafaria. And so I kind of held on to that kindness for the next few years. And then I wrote a lot while I was in film school and cold emailed a lot of other people to send those scripts around. And one of a manager who I really admired, because she worked with other writers that I loved, read it and responded to it. And so I signed with that manager while I was at Columbia, which was really helpful because it felt like I had one foot in the business while I still had one foot in school. And when I met with her for the first time and she said she wanted to sign me, I was like, great, I'll quit school tomorrow. And she was like, don't do that. She was like, you're not going to make money for so long. Please stay in school. And I did, but then when I was finished with school, I flew out to Los Angeles because that is kind of where the juice is squeezed, it felt like, and I needed to be out there. And the day that I landed in Los Angeles, Dana Fox, one of the writers that I had cold emailed many years ago, had her television show picked up, and she remembered my email. And so she wrote to me and asked if I was still interested in being an assistant. So I started working for her like a week later. So it was incredibly serendipitous and really lucky, but because I had kind of like a psychopath emailed them all consistently until they remembered me because I had emailed a lot, I think.
And that was Ben and Kate.
That was Ben and Kate, yes. And so my first year in Los Angeles, I was the showrunner's assistant on that television show.
And can you talk a little bit, I think even the term a writer's assistant, I think is a little confusing. In television, there's a writer's room and there's a showrunner. Do you want to talk about that just a little bit?
Yes. So, I mean, there's a writer's assistant, like a feature writer's assistant, which is kind of more of a personal assistant. And then in the television process, there's a writer's room of the writers, and there's an assistant who stays in that room all day. And their job is to take notes on everything that the writers say, because no one else has a computer. So you have to be a really good listener and a really fast typer. And you learn a lot by osmosis, and you usually end up getting to write a script at some point along the way. But I was the showrunner's assistant, which I actually found to be a much more valuable position because...
And the showrunner's the head writer.
Yes, the showrunner is the creator of the show and the head writer. So in television, the showrunner is kind of the boss, even more than the director, because directors come in every episode almost like substitute teachers, and the showrunner oversees the entire thing. So when I was working as Dana's show assistant, well, she was the showrunner. It was a sitcom, so we shot an episode in 5 days, and I would get to set at like maybe 6 a.m., which is when we started shooting, and I would be with Dana on set from 6 to maybe 10 a.m., and then at 10 a.m. we would go into the writer's room, and from 10 a.m. to 5 p.m. we would go back and forth between the writer's room and set as they were shooting, and then around 5 p.m. when the writers and the actors went home because the day was over, we would go to the editing bay, and then we would edit until however late we needed to, depending on how far behind we were. So I got to learn through osmosis every part of the process, which was so valuable. Dana's also a really, really, really generous boss and person, and invited me into those rooms and that process, which I don't think very many people see as much as I was able to see in that. But you get to see like why certain scenes are changed or cut while shooting because they don't work. And then like something you think works beautifully on the page, on set you realize why it's not going to work. And then something that you thought was so great on set, in the editing you realize why it's not going to work. So it was really helpful as a writer to watch what ended up being the story that we told, like what we thought would work in the beginning and then what actually worked at the end. And sometimes you don't know that until you do it. Like you're going to waste a lot of pages and days on set anyway because you just can't know until the end. But it was as valuable, if not more valuable, than film school to see it all in real time like that.
And so were you still writing on your own at that point?
I was, yeah. I was trying to as much as I could.
Anybody that's a student, you need to hear that.
I also was really lucky because Dana had a lot of feature work that she, now was spread so thin over the course of the show that I was able to come on and help her with that feature work, which is a good stutter step. And I was writing on my own as much as I could, which was probably not that much because it was really long hours, but it was still fun to feel like I had my own path to do something while working an assistant job, which for all the like joy and real wisdom of learning by osmosis also sometimes was really hard. Just inherently that job is really difficult. And so yes, I was trying to as much as I could. And then when that show was canceled after one season, I kept writing with Dana. She and I started doing movie rewrites as a writing team, like an ampersand team. And I continued to try and keep writing on my own as well.
So there was a lot of that in Set It Up.
Yes, well, that's the entire process for Set It Up was me being like, this is not Dana, because she's the only boss I've ever had, and she's like the antithesis. She's the most generous, most helpful, most loving boss. But I have a lot of friends in the entertainment industry who have had terrible bosses, and I realized that the previous years of our lives where they would complain to me about their experiences was all just research for what I eventually got to do.
I seem to remember working for somebody once, and I asked an assistant, and they said, well, he's not cruel. And I was like, as opposed to
what a baseline, yeah.
Oh, okay. Can you talk a bit about your process? So you're writing, here you are working as an assistant, you're still writing on your own. A lot of writers have a set time that they write every day. What's your process?
If I'm on script, to me the process is kind of twofold. There's a process when you're breaking story, which I like to be a lot looser and kind of let myself have a less structured day and like go on walks and go to lunch with friends, because that's when I'm still trying to figure out, I think, what the story is. And if I just sit at my desk, I could make myself crazy. My process is kind of top heavy. Like I like to spend a lot of time breaking the story so that I know it pretty well. And then the writing process feels less scary because you have a long outline that you're coming from. Then when I'm writing an actual script, I like to do it by page instead of by hour. People are so different. Some people sit at a computer from a certain time to a certain time and just do whatever they can. I like to try and do 5 pages a day. And then sometimes that's over by lunch and you feel great and you keep going. And sometimes you don't get 5 pages, even at midnight, and you just put it away. But that feels like a good barometer as to if I'm going at the pace I want to. And also if you're at a section that's, sometimes if a scene is, you can write 5 pages in a few hours, you are like, okay, that's working. And if it takes 3 days to try and get through 5 pages, there's usually probably something wrong with what you're trying to do. And then that's the time you can figure it out.
That sounds like a director. Well, just, getting through pages. Like, we shot 5 pages today.
Yeah, it's just like a terribly type A person who's trying to deal with a really incongruous process, probably.
But so you've written original screenplays and you've adapted screenplays, which is, correct me if I'm wrong, but that's unusual. Usually people kind of go one way or the other.
Yeah, I know people who've done both, and all of my adaptations have been such different processes. Dana and I came on to do a draft of Isn't It Romantic together. Aaron Cardillo wrote the first draft, a really funny writer, and Dana and I came on and wrote that draft. But then we were not on set for that movie, so it was maybe the least connection I have to any of the movies. But that was really a combination of Aaron's work and our work, and the director Todd who came on and did some work on it afterwards. Booksmart was a process where 2 really talented writers, Emily and Sarah, who wrote the first draft, and then Susanna, who wrote the second draft, they had written their drafts pretty far apart. It felt like this is a movie that everybody wanted to make, but no one really knew how to do it. And Emily and Sarah wrote their draft in 2009, and then Susanna wrote her draft in 2014. And when Olivia was brought on to kind of reconceptualize it in 2018, those are such different times for young women. What it felt like in 2009 versus 2014 versus 2018. So it felt like each version of the movie was kind of a reflection of what that time period was. And we were really excited to come in and try and make something that honored and reflected the young people that we had seen, and so much activism and so much bravery that we had seen from all these kids, and what it was like to be a young woman who was in high school, who the concept of something like Lean In had been around their whole lives, and how different that was. So that process of rewriting was kind of getting to reconceptualize this brilliant concept that they had all come up with Olivia, and then Don't Worry Darling was kind of similar. Shane and Carrie Van Dyke, who wrote the original draft of that, who are such talented writers, and Dick Van Dyke's grandsons, they had written the original draft, and it was a different idea, but kind of the same concept. And then we had kind of shifted the point of view a little bit as we were doing it that way. But so it's all different versions of collaboration and different versions of how much of the original script stays. So it's some of them have felt closer to kind of conceptualizing things than others, but it all feels the same kind of, I think, in terms of making sure everybody makes sense and everything feels like it's working as one piece.
So this is so funny because when we did the Zoom together, I think Nick and I were like, you guys could have talked all day. This is what I feel like. Let's back up a bit again. So in the first couple of films, it's very much the romantic comedy rom-com trope, but always with a strong female's point of view. A strong sense of self, right? There's a strong sense of I have to be who I am. I'm not just going to get whisked off by the guy. And then in Booksmart, she's so cute. In Booksmart, there's this very definite cleaving to individual people. They're crystal. And it's this huge cast, and yet they're all so crystal clear. And not in a way that it's like, that's the jock, that's the pretty girl. No. They are very, very specific characters. And then, as you and I discussed before, Don't Worry, Darling is almost like the inverse of everything you've written, in that it's take everything and pull it out upside down. So if we start with Set It Up, which has a lot of Husker love in it, let's be honest, if you haven't seen it, there's a lot of Dartmouth and Husker love.
We paid for a Nebraska football clip to be played
it's
in
very
that movie.
clear.
We had to pay a lot of money.
So there's a lot of Husker love in that. Isn't it romantic? Really cute, adorable film. And then we come to Booksmart. So you've come in. It's been written twice. Talk a little bit about the process with Olivia, because again, this is two separate films where you've worked with Olivia, and there's a real give and take and a real spirit of generosity between the two of you. Can you speak a bit about that?
Yes, I'd love to. I think she's just the most brilliant leader, director, storyteller. I feel really lucky to have worked with her twice and to hopefully keep working with her. And when I came on to Booksmart, she was already attached as the director. And her pitch for the movie was that she wanted it to be training day for high school girls. And that she took really seriously. She said, most high school movies look back at being young with a kind of almost patronizing or like, isn't it cute about how passionately they feel. But she felt really strongly that like high school is war. And when you're feeling these things as a high schooler, they are the most important, most devastating, biggest feelings that anyone has ever felt. And she wanted to make a movie that I think felt like that in a way that it was nostalgic for people to remember feeling like that and being in high school, and also felt relevant to people who were that age now. And that was such a inspiring and wonderful challenge to then try and come up with a story that matched that. And I think going in and taking really seriously their feelings, and also making it a story about how the first best friend you have, especially as a young woman, is this kind of irreplaceable relationship, because it's a level of connection and a strength of connection that it can only really happen when you're that young and you don't have anything else going on, and it informs your whole life. And so many people working on the movie brought stories about their own best friends, like their own Mollys and Amy's, and what they meant to them, and whether they were still in touch, and how they've affected their lives that way. So that was a core part of it. And then I think she also wanted to make like a real movie, and that she wanted to do things in this movie that you could only do in a movie. So something like the dance sequence or the Barbie sequence. She was like, why are we doing this if we aren't using this medium as deeply and as big as we can? And so that was also a really fun and inspiring, North Star to follow in terms of trying to make it feel as big and stylish as it can while still feeling grounded and specific to this story.
It's funny you say that. I was, when I was doing my research to speak with you again, I was thinking about Aristotle's definition, and he talks about spectacle. That without spectacle, you can't really tell drama. It doesn't exist without spectacle, and there's so much spectacle in Booksmart.
Yes.
I mean, it's full of spectacle.
And she fought for that the whole time, which was so much fun from a writing perspective, to get to write to that, and then also to have someone who is fighting for it. Like, they wanted to cut the Barbie sequence until the very end. And to their credit, when you do test screenings for movies and you ask an audience what parts they liked and what parts they didn't, and the Barbie sequence, which was done by this really incredible company called Shadow Machine, that's like a puppeteer company, it was very expensive and it was very time consuming, and so they weren't going to pay for it until they knew exactly what it should be. And so in these test screenings, what happened during where the Barbie sequence should be was a pencil drawing of the Barbies with my voice and Olivia's voices, because we couldn't get Beanie and Caitlin to do it until we knew exactly what it would be. So then in every test screening, people would be like, I didn't like that part. That part was weird and I didn't understand it. And Olivia fought so hard. She was like, I promise you it'll be worth it when it's done. We can't cut it based on this. And she really, I'm so glad that she did, but she knew that kind of spectacle, I think, was important to something like this, to make it feel like what she wanted it to be.
I'm glad you talked about the fight between the two women, because there's nothing like that fight. It's almost like breaking up with a lover. It's such a horrific thing when you're close to a girlfriend and there's that one fight that just has to happen. It has to happen for their own individual lives to move forward. Was there a particular part of Booksmart that was hard to write, that you kept going back to, where you just, so obviously the dolls were a different thing. That was a whole
very
different
fun
thing.
to write. It was just hard to convince anyone to let us do it. But I think, I really loved writing all of it. I loved writing it when it was just Olivia reading the pages, and I loved writing it. You talked about the cast. Our casting director is this woman named Allison Jones, who's just the most prolific an amazing cast. She cast like anything that you've loved in the last 20 years. She discovered the whole cast of The Office and cast them on that. She did Freaks and Geeks. She did like every major comedy. And she's amazing because she goes everywhere to look for people. Like Victoria Ruesca, who plays Ryan, is not an actor. She's just like a skateboarder from Los Angeles that Allison found and was like, you've got to use this girl in something. And Austin, who plays Alan, the theater kid, he was a junior at NYU. And she found him, and he flew out during his spring break and then missed the last part of his classes to be in the movie. He's literally, when we were filming the murder mystery scene, he was writing his final term paper on the top of the stairs while we were doing it. So it's like that is such a big part of it. And then getting to rewrite the roles towards the people that she had cast. Like originally Theo and Tanner were very different. And then she found Nico Haraga, the amazing skateboarder also, who hadn't been in any movies before, and Eduardo, and then we just recreated those characters for them because Olivia recognized how special they were. So that was a big part of the process. I forgot why I started talking about that and what the question was.
We were talking about if there was a particularly difficult part to write.
So I would say the fight maybe was the part I spent the most time on, and we rewrote the most because we wanted it to actually that's not true. The graduation speech was probably the thing that we rewrote the most, and even through the edit, kind of we're playing with different variations and weren't sure what it should be. Because originally it was much longer and much cheesier, which is always, I think, the danger of that section. So that was probably the part that needed the most work consistently throughout the whole thing. Because I also think the tone of the movie coming up to it determined what the speech needed. So it was kind of hard to know what it should be until the end anyway. But yeah, even the parts that were hard, like, were fun because of getting to do it with Olivia and do it with the cast. And so it was the rare experience where, like, the more challenging parts were just as enjoyable as the easier parts.
So I had asked you earlier this question, but a question came up from the audience that relates to it. So I'd asked you about how there were so many LGBTQIA people who have seen this film, who really relate to it and appreciate the film, appreciate the portrayal of particularly a lead character being gay. And, you know, Artie's come out, that's not the drama. She just happens to be gay, and this is her path. But we got a question saying, do you have, and I think these are related, do you have any advice particularly for people who are gay, lesbian, et cetera, growing up, and who want to be screenwriters with regard to entering into the business?
I think, well, first of all, that's like the most meaningful reaction. I think I can speak for everyone, for Olivia and Beanie and Caitlin, because we've all said it before, but that's certainly the most meaningful response that we get to the movie. It makes us really happy. I think my advice would be the same and not necessarily specific to an LGBTQA writer, but to, it sounds so cheesy, but to just like write from your experiences. I also think write the movie that you want to see is some of the best advice that I was given, which is because you probably know that movie better than anybody else, and then at least you're having fun while you're writing it because you're your own ideal audience. And so I think writing towards the experience, not just the experiences that you know and you've had, but the movie that you wish you'd seen when you were younger, which is kind of what this experience was, not only makes the process more fun, but then is kind of like giving the world the gift of that movie that you always wanted to see when you were little.
That's beautiful. So let's talk a little bit about Don't Worry, Darling.
It's a boring answer.
I don't think so. Let's talk about Don't Worry, Darling. So you had told me that in that original script, it was a woman who was trapped in a really bad marriage, a really ugly marriage. And you flipped that because, again, I feel like this is all of your films like through the looking glass. So can we talk a bit about that process with Olivia, which is a little different? Why this film? Why this story? And why that way? And if you haven't seen Don't Worry, Darling, you probably did see in the clips and the reel. It's gorgeous to look at. I mean, it's
a
gorgeous.
Beautiful movie. It was shot by this cinematographer named Maddie Libatique, who's Oscar nominated and so prolific and so talented. And the production design was actually the same production designer as Booksmart, this woman named Katie Byron, who is so talented and so creative and really comes at things from other angles. And they both did such incredible work. It was so fun to come to that set every day because I just had never seen anything like it. But yes, the original script for Don't Worry, Darling was more of a straight horror movie. And it was about a woman in a really abusive, terrible marriage who is trying to escape from a town that's treating all of its women really badly. And the concept was so cool, and the twist of the movie was so cool, and Olivia and I were both really drawn to it, but we had been having conversations separately about kind of wanting to tell stories like Get Out or movies like that really examine from another angle the harder parts of those conversations, and that it was also inspired a little bit by a conversation that she had with Gloria Steinem, where she was it was at a point where she felt very down about kind of the what was happening to women in the United States. And she asked Gloria Steinem, what do we do? And Gloria Steinem said, you stop paying taxes. And she was like, what? and Gloria Steinem said, if all women stopped paying taxes, then something would happen. And Olivia was like, well, I have a mortgage and like a house and stuff, and I don't really want to stop paying taxes. And she said, well, that's why nothing changes. And that idea that to really change something, you kind of have to rip up from the studs a life that in a lot of ways you probably like, was really inspiring to us. And the idea of what are you willing to give up to do the right thing? What are you willing to give up to fix a problem like that? Because it's easy when it seems obvious that it's bad. And it's a lot harder when there are elements of it that you're really enjoying. And so we then kind of had this new goal to make just the most beautiful and desirable and fun and inviting world. And what do you do when you suddenly realize that might be kind of rotten at the core, and that might be hiding things that you don't want to think about, and how much easier it is to stay in the bubble of how nice your life is than it is to kind of look beneath the surface of those things.
And even there's a survival element even in the character that she plays with, because my kids are here.
Yeah.
That's the ultimate linchpin to me in that film, which, just makes complete and total sense.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like, take everything.
Her performance is so amazing in that movie too, and she was doing all of that while directing, and we made it during COVID. It's like, and she was producing it, so it makes all that even more impressive to me. But yes, then there are all sorts of different reasons why someone chooses to stay in something that they want to ignore might not be the best place. So that was a really exciting North Star for us than when we were tackling it from a slightly different angle.
And her character is also very different than the other women, where she's very, let's talk about, I don't want to give the story away, but let's talk about that a little bit. She's very willing to be outside the norm. She's very willing to be off the cuff and not play by the rules, but at the same time, she's very much going to play by the rules. She's never going to leave and all that. And that's why she makes like this best, great friend, right?
Yeah.
For the Florence Pugh character.
Her character is kind of the wildest of the bunch in theory, but maybe the most rigid to the rules in a way that no one else understands.
It's fascinating. I mean,
I'm trying to do it without spoiling anything.
I know. But structurally, when you look at the structure of the story, it's absolutely fascinating that it's built like that. And was that something you two tore out a little bit?
Yes, we talked the whole time about how we wanted it to be a 3-viewing movie. Not just we were like, this is great for ticket sales, but also like we want you to watch it the first time and think it's one thing, and watch it the second time maybe knowing something you didn't before and seeing everything differently, and then watch a third time and start to question even what you thought the second time. But we wanted it to make sense. We wanted it to be just as enjoyable the first time and the second time, and to make sense in totally different ways. So it was, I've used this word already, but it was like, again, an incredible challenge to try and make everything work both times.
Okay. Wow. I could talk about that film all night. So let's talk a bit about the switch to producing, or the addition of producing. First of all, you'll notice that Katie knows everybody's name. That's also something that's not usual, which is probably part of what makes you a great producer. Women tend to be wonderful producers. Do you want to talk a little bit about producing and the interest in producing, et cetera?
Yeah, I've worked with so many wonderful women producers and male producers, but I agree. I think it's a skill set. I think moms make really great producers also, because they are doing so many things at once and keeping so many things afloat. It's a really natural skill set to them. The first time I had a full producer credit was on Booksmart. which was an experience where Olivia had me on set the entire time and then through post-production. And through a variety of circumstances, we ended up not having any other producers on the movie. So then it was kind of her and I on set, like the inmates running the asylum. But it was a real trial by fire in terms of learning those responsibilities, not just creatively, but everything else that was going on. We had an amazing AD, this guy named Scott Robertson, who was so helpful in that and really filled that role also. But that was when I really fell in love with that part of the process. And I think it's much easier to do it when you're working with a director who you love so much and who you have that kind of naturally collaborative relationship anyway. But I found it's like an element maybe of logistical puzzle solving that I really enjoy, and then also kind of just a louder voice in some of the creative conversations that I'm really grateful to have.
So you've acquired a great children's book that you adapted called The Paper Bag Princess. For people here who maybe have not read that book, do you want to talk a little bit about what it's about?
Yes, The Paper Bag Princess is about a princess. I mean, it's a very short children's book. It's like 10 pages. But it's about a princess who's the prince that she's betrothed to is kidnapped by a dragon the night before their wedding, and then she goes off into the forest to rescue him. And then the end of the book, I will spoil this one, is that she finds the prince and saves him, and then the prince is so upset and kind of emasculated by having been saved that he's really upset about it, and then she dumps him. So that's the end of that book. But that is such an exciting project. It's one of those things that I don't know if it ever is actually going to happen, but getting to develop it with Elizabeth Banks, who is going to direct it, and Margot Robbie, who's
Margot Robbie, yeah.
Not just an amazing performer, but a really great producer. Those are two of my favorite women working in that arena. So to get to do that with them was really, really fun. And I hope it happens one day. I really love it.
And you had two projects that you set up with Amy Pascal.
Yes.
One that has the word Marvel next to it.
Yes.
But these are things that, as we know, can take a long time.
Yes.
So we can't talk about them specifically. But there are things happening right now that we really do want to talk about, and that's the Writers Guild strike. Mm-hmm. And I think, again, Oz, we're back to Oz. A lot of people don't understand not just the AI aspect of this, but it has a lot to do with what we're all going through in the entertainment industry, whether it's exhibition, all the way up to actually creating the work. Could you talk a bit about that as a Writers Guild member?
Yeah, I'm so proud to be a member of the Writers Guild. I'm really grateful to be a member of a guild like the Writers Guild. And I know how hard the WGA worked to try and prevent this from happening. And I also know that the WGA is a guild that does know its own value, and I think took a stand here not just for writers but for all the other guilds at a time that feels really important and like a real fulcrum for how our business is changing. I think the AI is a very large part of it. I think there's no way that the government's going to be able to move fast enough to regulate something that's changing so rapidly, and I think a lot of other guilds are going to join in wanting to put some guardrails in and understand what that technology is and what that process is. I also think it's a matter of just securing screenwriting and television writing as an industry and as a career, instead of being forced into the smallest labor cost gig economy that I think some of these companies want to turn it into. I also think at its core, it's about if streaming is profitable or not, because a lot of these companies are telling their shareholders that it's very profitable while they're telling the guild that it's not profitable at all. And so they're lying to one of us. I'm very proud to be a part of a guild that is, I think, that fights so hard for its members and is so transparent with its members. And I am really looking forward to resolving it fairly for everybody, which I know the writers will work toward doing.
So the actors go after the writers?
The actors and the directors are next, yeah, and they're about to start their negotiations, which
Right.
I'm not in either of those guilds, so I don't have any hints as to how that's going. But there's been so much solidarity from all the unions in this particular strike, and on the picket lines, there are members of SAG, so many members of SAG every day, a lot of DGA members, a lot of IATSE members, and that has been a really heartening experience, is to feel all of the different guilds coming together and realizing the power in their unity and how much we have to look out for each other. And that's been incredibly inspiring to me, and I know all the writers are so grateful for that support and can't wait to continue to give it to all the other guilds.
Yeah, I think, so I am a member of the Screen Actors Guild, and we've had our strike authorization come through. I think the issue that you can't control your work or your face or what you've put down already forever is terrifying.
Yeah.
And the fact that you're then, not only can you not control it, but you shouldn't be paid for it, is really terrible. It's just terrible. And so I don't know about you personally, but I have a lot of writer friends who, are on shows. They're not making any money right now, and they still have mortgages and kids that go to school, et cetera, et cetera. They live in LA, which is a really expensive place to live, or New York. And it's a terrible time because they're not getting paid. Can you talk a little bit? You were asked to do a few things before the strike hit, right? Like, there are certain things that happen before a strike happens. Can you talk a bit about what that looks like?
Do you mean like people trying to complete work before? Yeah, certainly. Yeah. Everybody's trying to get their scripts in before the strike. Everyone's trying to do as much as they can before the strike. I think you're right, though. I mean, I also think that the asks are extraordinarily reasonable to be
from the guild.
Yeah, to be compensated fairly. I think to be a part of the profit participation. I mean, the Writers Guild put out a document showing what the total asks of everything they were asking for would be in terms of the revenue, like the profit of the studios, the 8 different studios. And the largest amount it would be was 0.2%, and the smallest was 0.004%. So it feels like the asks are extraordinarily reasonable. It's more about taking a stand in terms of what they can get away with, which is why it feels like such an important time to stick up for that.
So grateful you said that. Ladies and gentlemen, it's been a long night. So I want to thank you all for being here.
Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you to Katie for being here. We're so grateful, and we hope you'll come back.
I said I want to keep making movies just so I can come back and show them here.
Wouldn't it be fun? We'd have to have Katie back. Thank you for your generosity.
Thank you so
We're
much.
so grateful that you're here, and Rose, it's way past your bedtime. Good night, everybody.
Thank you.